Yes, we've had some really good times. I'm not gonna sell you. Don't worry, it's just a comparison video. You're not going anywhere. Sony XB40 versus the wking D8. The new budget boombox for value for money. Now, this came out mid-2017. It's in Bluetooth speaker terms, it's an old man, but people still have an interest. Still one of my favourite speakers to listen to, although it has a lot of quirks. And I was specifically asked, can I compare the XB40 with the wking D8? Now, I will point out the most obvious advantage to me. One of the reasons why I still like the XB40 is it's about as large as I can get and still be hand holdable in a reasonably throw about form factor. It's nicely rubberized. I can mess about with it. It's not fully waterproof. These are both IPX5. They're both splash proof, but don't submerge them. But look, that's easy to hold in the hand still. Still very portable. Any bigger than that, yeah, I can hold that in my hands, but it's now becoming quite clunky. 1.5 kilos the XB40, 2.5 kilos the wking D8. There's a big difference in size. On paper, that's still a 40-watt speaker. They say that's a 50-watt speaker. It does go loud. It's certainly a cheapo boombox. How do they compare? Well, I'm interested myself, as I said, because the problem with the XB40 is you can get a reasonable sound out of it, but you do have to mess around in the app. You do have to get the settings just right, and it changes all the way up with volume. So you either get something midway in terms of settings that you'll be happy with and not have to think about, or depending on your volume, you'll keep going in and changing those settings. So in each of my tests in this video, you will notice I have changed the settings. What I'm doing is I'm trying to get my neutral settings in the app. You can change bass, mids and treble, and then it has an extra bass button feature. The other big benefit of the XB40 is it's Sony. It's LDAC. Whereas you've still got SBC, so you've got basic Bluetooth codec, you've got potentially a very high quality codec, depending on what settings you have for LDAC and whether it can use its optimum settings. However, potentially very high quality, high bandwidth Bluetooth codec. So it could go some way to making up any differences in terms of the extra power you may have on hand. I'm saying may because we've got to test it with the wking D8. Other headline features in how they compare. Well, you're looking around £80 each. Now, someone just mentioned to me they saw this on Amazon for 50 quid. I didn't see it for 50 quid. I'm seeing it for around 70 quid. You can get this secondhand on eBay, depending on the deal you get, £50 to £80. I did get this one secondhand, by the way, for £80. You do have more battery capacity on hand with the Sony. Now, I haven't tested this particular one for maximum volume. And it's going to depend on whether you have the lights on and off. So quickly, I should mention, yeah, you can have fancy lights on the surround. You can't have any fancy lights on your wking. 5,400 milliamp hours, 4,000 milliamp hours are the specs. Both 7.4 volts. So of course, in real terms, you've got two batteries of that capacity. But at 7.4 volts, you get the capacity of one, but you're upping your power output. Your 7.4 instead of your 3.7 volts. You do get proprietary charger with the Sony XB40. Charges at 9.5 volts, 2.2 amps, which means you're getting 21 watts of power to charge with. With the wking, 5 volts, 2.3 amps, 15 watts of charging power. In terms of drivers, now you've got two full range woofers. I say full range because you've also got two passive radiators, one on the front, one on the back. With the wking, you do actually have tweeters. So you've got two woofers and two tweeters, which may or may not give it an advantage. So as I said, I've done a review not long ago on the wking, bit bass heavy for me at low volume, does even up, does become quite flattish, I should say, as you go up the volume scale. You do have two modes. You have the normal mode and the EQ mode. The EQ mode by hitting the EQ button. Well, in this video, I'm basically really, until I get the full volume, only going to do default mode, because EQ mode basically just goes louder with a teeny bit more in the bass. You're losing some of the mids and you get a bit more in the highs. It means default mode is flatter. So I'm going with the flatter mode. And as I said, I'm going to have neutral settings with my XB40. And I'm also going to compare it with neutral settings and then hitting the extra bass button, or clear audio as they call it in the app. And it should make it clear, because you think extra bass just means extra bass. But if it really is clear audio was promoted as an on-the-fly equalizer, auto equalizer, which means it's doing so-called clever things in the background, although it does more or less just seem to boost the bass. So that's basically my overview of my settings that I'm going into the test with. Only default mode because it's flatter. Bear in mind, if you hit EQ mode, it will go considerably louder, but in terms of the actual frequency response, you're just getting a little bit more bass, you're losing a little bit of the mids, and you're getting more of the highs. 33%, so the kind of low volume-ish sort of test.
Abrázame toda la noche, no nos queda mucho tiempo más. No quiero perder lo que queda. Seguimos siempre la pasión y confiamos solo en el amor. Yeah. No quiero perder lo que queda. Y más allá. A través de la gran oscuridad hasta que me convierta en rayos. Y más allá. A través de la gran oscuridad. Y más
wking D8 default mode, 36%. XB40, my neutral settings, 40%. They are then volume matched. You can turn on extra bass if you want another dollop of bass, and it becomes bass heavy. And this is what you get. And the difference is the wking is bass heavy. It does have bigger bass, but it's over bass heavy compared to the rest of the frequency range. My neutral settings much closer to the original, and extra bass on becomes bass heavy again. But you've got the option, absolute terms, wking down to -18 at 50, volume matched, -22, 4 decibels less bass at 50 Hz for the XB40 in neutral, but turn extra bass on, you've got the same, -18, goes as loud at 50 Hz as the wking D8, but at 70-80 Hz, there's a much bigger boost for the D8, 1 to 3 decibels louder than the XB40. But if I look at the original, and I look at those 3 peaks there, the closest to that, although that third peak can't hold up, is going to be the XB40, because the first 2 peaks are very boosted. So it's a bigger bass on the D8, but that's due to heavy boosting. That's the original again, and you can see those mids do not fall away very quickly. They hold up from 150 Hz to 1400 Hz. On the D8, it's falling away all the time at that range. On my neutral settings, it's holding up a bit more, but you can't get much more bass without it becoming leaner elsewhere, as you can see. So that's as neutral as I can get it. So you may or may not be surprised just how close these two speakers can be, but obviously with obvious differences. As already mentioned, at low volume, wking D8 for me, too bass heavy. For you, it may be absolutely perfect. That's why I call it a boombox. It's capable of really digging deep in the bass, giving you a satisfying boom-like bass experience. You can set the XB40 to bass heavy or neutral. That's why I quite like it. As I said, unlike the fact that you can handhold it. But there isn't a lot in it, is there? Depending on, you know, what you're trying to listen out for. You do have that much lower bass kick on the wking, but you can get this tuned to be even more bass heavy than I've got it. I've got neutral settings and then I'm just hitting extra bass. I could have turned the bass up in the app all the way, but that wasn't the point of what I'm trying to achieve in this comparison video. Just remember, if you look at my settings, you still got headroom in the app. There's nothing you can do unless you're using a third-party software EQ, which I don't use. I know people keep commenting, well, that's not fair, you've done the EQ on your speaker here, and you never... I'm only using EQ if it embeds into firmware. There's a ton of reasons why I don't get involved in software EQ. To my ears anyway, there's always something not right with it, no matter how balanced you try to get it. The bands are never quite in the right place. And I have to say, EQ is an art. There's lots of things you can do to mess up the actual track itself with, you know, poor use of an EQ. It's not perfect EQ. It's not like I'm just balancing out the tracks. The more bands you use, the more problems you're going to introduce or potentially introduce. 3-band in firmware EQ, you know, is a no-brainer. So it's much easier to use and it's cross, you know, it goes across devices. It's just embedded in the speaker. I don't have to remember to turn it on or off. So there's a ton of reasons why I don't get involved in every speaker trying to tailor it to exactly, should it be flat or do people want it with the most bass? It'd be an absolute nightmare. Rather try and tailor them to sound neutral if possible and then do the comparison. It's a bit dry sounding. It's a bit bass heavy. The wking D8, to my ears, of course, it's all about taste. For 80, 70 quid or whatever, or 50 quid some people are saying they're getting for, it's a great value. And there isn't a lot in it between the two speakers. So, I mean, that speaks volumes for the wking, which is not a new speaker itself, I have to say. This came out end of 2018. Neither of them are actually new speakers. You can get more fizz. There's a little bit more reality going on, a little bit more hi-fi-ish. I will say it's not hi-fi, but it's more hi-fi-ish, the XB40. So to me, it's a bit more refined listen. But you may not care about that. You may just want it bass heavy, but even then, it still sounds decent. As I said, there isn't a huge amount in it. Once you properly volume match them, and that's, I think, is the thing with some people say, well, they hardly sound any different. It's because I'm attempting to, in my opinion. I feel I have correctly volume matched them as far as possible to remove the dynamic differences you will get just by having them at different volumes. I could make these two comparisons completely sound different if I edge towards one of them having a little bit more volume than the other. Right off the bat, it's going to be a bit more dynamic. So let's move up the volume scales, 66%. XB40 +8 bass, +8 treble, 0 mids, extra bass off. Turn on extra bass. You do get a nice bass kick, around 3 decibels in the bass, but there's a knock on, there's a slight recess in the mids. Don't forget 63% for the Sony XB40, D8 66% to volume match them. In many ways quite similar between the Sony with custom settings +8 and extra bass on, and the default mode on the D8. The big difference is the Sony has a bit of a peak around 8,000 Hertz and then falls off quite rapidly. The D8 has a peak around 13,000 and holds up a bit more at the extreme high end. In terms of the bass, it's a bit weird. The D8 tuned with a big upper bass lift, then it rolls off and then you get a lift at 44 Hertz. It's capable of digging really deep. I don't seem to be making the most of it. 5 decibels louder at 44 Hertz because the XB40 starts rolling off from around 60 Hertz. So 50, 60 Hertz, the Sony has it by 3 to 5 decibels. 70 to 80 Hertz, it's neck and neck. But the D8 digs deeper because of that peak at 44 Hertz. So the Sony a bit more rounded, but dropping off quicker. The D8 more of a punch, but in the upper bass, capable of digging pretty deep, closer than I expected. So again, it's close until you really try and listen out for the differences. It's a lot easier to pick them out and going straight from one track to the other. If you listening to one day and the other the next day, you're going to be hard pushed to remember if there was any differences at all. Capable of sounding quite similar, but you do get this upper bass kick, which slightly over-edged on the wking, which is not completely to my liking. It's a nice listen. I'm just in this comparison trying to pick holes so you know where I stand or what to expect. It's a bit dry sounding in comparison to the XB40. What do I mean by that? Well, there's a bit more fizz, there's a bit more sweetness to the sound, there's a tiny bit more definition to the sound with the XB40. But there's more weight. The wking is more of a powerful listen. And you get that upper bass, which I don't particularly like, and it's masking what the lower bass that's definitely there, but it's being masked to quite an extent because the upper bass lift. But it doesn't get much loving, does it, the XB40? And it was always something that went kind of under the radar. But for me, it's still showing you why, it's still a favourite of mine personally, and I know a lot of other people out there. It's still a favourite speaker because it's the limits of the size that you'd want, and you can still get some sort of boombox sound or refined sound, whichever one you want. You can tune it, but you have to fine tune it, and that is the problem. The wking is ready to go. Just leaves us wondering, well, what is the absolute headroom? How loud do they go? And in this one I will be switching EQ mode on because it's the loudest mode, so I'm going to have both default and EQ mode going on the wking. And of course this time I'm going, even to have neutral you've got to go +10 bass, +10 treble. I've got mids at 0, and then I'm turning on X bass as well, so you get a bit of both.
I think the girls with their nails done now. Girls with their nails done. I think the girls with their nails done. Girls with their nails done. I think the girls with their nails done now. Girls with their nails done. I think the girls with their nails done. Girls with their girls with their nails done now. Girls with their nails done now.
Loudest of the bunch is the wking D8 in EQ mode. It's not that far ahead of the XB40 with extra bass off, because when you turn extra bass on, you lose body, although you gain bass. And XB40 actually has a higher peak. That's absolute instantaneous sound at any one point, 107.5, 106.9, but not much really in it. The big difference is D8 sounds much more bass heavy. The XB40 sounds a bit clearer, a bit more defined, but without the weight of the bass that you get with the D8. That's because it doesn't have the body and the highs that the XB40 hangs on to, albeit with custom settings plus 10 in the treble. In terms of bass, it's about the same at the actual bass peak, minus 24, 82, minus 26, and minus 24 again, 82. It's the same. The big difference is it has a peak at 44 Hertz, adding substantial weight, minus 30, compared to minus 41, minus 38. That's 8 decibels louder than the XB40 at 44 Hertz with extra bass on. You also have more upper bass, 150, 160 Hertz, minus 27. That's 3 decibels up on the XB40 at the same 150, 160-ish Hertz. So the 44 Hertz and 160 Hertz upper bass basically mean you get more bass weight at maximum volume. Bring it up the rear, D8 in default mode, but hardly by anything, minus 28.8, minus 28.8 again on the XB40. But the XB40 having a bigger peak, but in default mode, the bass is actually heavier on the D8. Minus 23 is the loudest of the lot, the 82, and again, minus 29 is louder than the lot, including in EQ mode. So default, not quite as bright as the EQ mode, having a bit more bass. The XB40 surprised me by being as close as it is. For an older speaker, I was quite surprised. So the XB40, you know, it holds up, doesn't it? It actually has the bigger peaks because there's more going on down the frequency range. When I talk about it being boombox, because I think it's all about the bass you can get for the money at the wking D8. For me, I say it goes louder because I go by the average that you're getting across the track and across the frequency range in terms of pure peak. So an absolute fraction of an instant. How loud did it go? The XB40 takes those honours as the loudest. If you go by peak, and I know a lot of people do go by peak, although, having said that, what they're calling peak is normally max. And there's a difference between peak and max, by the way. So I hope some people, you know, think, oh, that's an option I never thought about. As I said, it does go under the radar, the XB40. It still has a place. If you want decent, hand-holdable, about as big as you can go, but can still go, you know, up there nearly as loud as some of these new loud, you know, volume type speakers. It can still hold its own, and you can certainly get bargains second hand, you know, depending on what's out there at the time you go on eBay or something like that. So yeah, as I said, I was specifically asked to do this, and I've done it. I do these things when I can, but I can't always do it. I push for time most of the time. So again, hope you got something out of that, and thank you for watching.
UK